Well, hello. Thanks for joining us for this week's panel conversation. We had a great panel today of local leaders in government, and we're going to be asking each of the panelists 3 questions around engagement, particularly as communities start to gear up with their American Rescue Plan funds. How are they finding ways to engage with their community and assess community needs? But the broader context is how are communities developing and creating and supporting just strong engagement practices that's so critical in helping people feel like they're part of the community and for benefiting that sense of community that you always like to build. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President of National Engagement with a company called Polco. We work with communities around engagement and around helping to track and assess performance from a resident's perspective and a business perspective. But the idea today is really to just gather ideas from these local government leaders. We're hoping that you can get a new perspective, come up, hear about a good idea that's working that you can use in your communities. And really is just to try to share ideas and solutions that can be helpful to you as local government leaders or in any of the work that you are doing. Here's the layout of the agenda. I'll do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then we will queue up the topics. There's 3 questions that I'm going to be asking each of the panelists, and we'll provide each of the panelists an opportunity to respond to it. When that all wraps up, we'll have a little bit of a dialogue on any issues that were kind of prompted during the discussion, and then we'll wrap it up. Generally takes about an hour, and I'll try to manage that as best I can to make sure that that happens. So if that sounds okay, let's kind of jump into the introductions. Our first panelist is Kelley Kinsler, who has extensive experience in government at the city, county, and state levels, and currently leads City Hall Essentials, a government consulting company. Kelley's experience is wide and varied, which really supports her knowledge about the value and importance of engagement and how to accomplish it. Throughout her career, she has been very active with state and national professional associations, including TCMA and ICMA. In fact, she was recognized as City Manager of the Year last year by TCMA, which is a great recognition. So congratulations for that, Kelley. She's got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, sociology, and a master's degree in public administration. Kelley, that is a great resume, but I would love it if you would share a little bit more about your background.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Yes, I have definitely worked at the state level. I did grant administration for the Department of Justice early on in my career. I have run a state agency that in the state of New Mexico. It was the New Mexico District Attorneys Association. So I learned so much by running that big organization. I've been a county manager for part of my professional life and a city manager. I recently became affiliated with City Hall Essentials, and I do consulting for City Hall Essentials, interim management assignments, anywhere from, possibly working out a budget, if they're short a budget officer, any type of consulting really with City Hall that a municipality might need. And I do it in both big and small municipalities throughout Texas and New Mexico.
I think it's really cool that you've got that experience, that broad experience in all of the different tiers of government, with the exception of the national government. It just broadens your perspective, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what your ideas are around engagement. But I really appreciate it, and I'm happy that you're here, Kelley. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Our second panelist is Kelley Bacon, who serves as the Deputy City Manager in Chula Vista, California. Kelley has more than 35 years of public sector experience and has led just many significant projects in the community in a variety of just really important areas, from finance to HR to economic development, capital developments, critical administrative kinds of things. So comes with a really wide toolkit. Her experience is really very impressive. Before coming to Chula Vista, she spent 17 years in Grand Junction, Colorado. Kelley comes with a bachelor's degree in organizational management and human resources and a master's degree in human resource management. She's also committed to the profession and is involved with a lot of state level and professional level associations. Kelley, thank you for joining us, and I would love it if you would add a little bit more to that background.
Certainly. Well, as you mentioned, I have worked for both counties and the city of Chula Vista in finance, HR, IT, and working on a number of special projects. Have spent the last 8 years as a deputy city manager in Chula Vista, and I've had the opportunity to work on some really fun projects. And one of the latest ones was the transfer of the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista to City of Chula Vista ownership. So we now manage that as an Olympic and Paralympic training site.
That sounds very cool. I know you've had some great experience in developing some cool ordinances and well, just a handful of capital projects that sounded really cool. Thank you, Kelley, for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Our third panelist is Mike Perez, who has been the Weslaco city manager since the end of 2014. Mike has 43 years of local government experience and has worked in several other communities. And he actually retired from the city of McAllen, where he served as city manager for almost 22 years. And then he worked a little bit in the private sector, did a little bit of interim city manager work, and has now been back into the city manager's seat for a little while. He is known and has mentored many of his fellow colleagues to become successful managers, which I think is really a great attribute, Mike, for your commitment to the profession. You've been an active member in the Lions Club locally and is a past president of Texas City Manager Association, and of course with ICMA, amongst other local organizations and like the United Way and various church committees. Mike, thank you for being here. And with that broad and varied background, I would love for you to add a little bit more color to your resume.
Well, I've been in the business for a while. Started off as a city manager in a small town of 10,000. And when I was not quite 27, and I learned very quickly that just because you have academic training doesn't mean that you have the ability to dance with politicians. And that, I think, in this profession, you need to figure out how to do very quickly. So it's not just being technically qualified and ready to do it, but you also have to be able to dance. I wasn't a very good dancer at 27 years old, 28 and 29. Went on to Harlingen, a town of about 50,000, and that's where I learned put on my dancing shoes and kind of honed my skills. And then I was able to. I was in McAllen for almost 22 years, and then here. Done a lot of things from building libraries to police stations to convention centers to, fine arts auditorium, public works facilities, fire stations, parks. Done a lot of those things, over my career, probably totaling maybe $250 million plus. So I've had a good time. I kind of like this business because I get to interact with a lot of people in the community, and you get to build things. And I kind of learned late in life, we build systems and processes, and I've always been a big believer we have systems and processes in place that solves about 85% of your problems. But when you leave, whoever follows you is either very good at maintaining them or upgrading them, or not good at all, and they fall apart. Yeah. What does stay in place are the parks you build and the facilities that you put in, the streets, the water plants, the sewer plants, the drainage. Those stay way beyond your term there, and they stay longer than the systems and policies you put in place. So it's been a very interesting career for me. I've had a great time. I can't say it wasn't with a certain amount of difficulties, and really those of us who've been in the profession a long time realize that sometimes our family misses out a lot on the things because we have to be there for emergencies or meetings, so we miss baseball games, soccer games, recitals, wedding anniversaries, etc. But it's been a good ride, and I'm lucky to say I still have my same wife. So I think a lot goes to her for being patient with me in my profession. So thank you very much.
It's great, Mike, that you're able to join us. For a person that's been in the business as long as you have, I would guess you've been doing the dance pretty well. So really, I love it, though, the way that you have kind of described what I think city managers hold passionately in terms of the progress and the things that you can accomplish at a community level. I think that is one of the reasons why we are in this business, and thanks for bringing that up and reminding us of the things that we do and the value that we contribute to communities around the world. Well, the topic today is the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. We're just kind of coming out of this really disruptive environment that's been impacting us for the last year plus. And just given that unsettled environment, it just becomes more important than ever to maintain a meaningful connection with our residents and community stakeholders. We need to make sure that they feel connected in the decisions that are being made. And it's just as important for community leaders to understand where current impact or current priorities and current expectations needs are, because what was existing a couple of years ago may not in fact be existing now. So as communities are starting to enter into this American Rescue Plan phase, what are communities doing in order to identify what their community needs are? How are you ensuring that resident needs are being included in that conversation? But you also have to recognize that the pandemic created so many challenges to communities, and engagement, honestly, has never, ever been easy. We know through our research that there's probably only about 20% of American adults have ever been to a city council meeting. So the whole aspect of engagement has always been challenging. And then you lay on top of that the challenges around the public health emergency with the pandemic. And while most communities will tell you that engagement levels have increased, and I would appreciate you kind of identifying and talking about what your experience has been, it doesn't take away the importance and value of making sure that those engagement techniques and strategies and ways that you involve residents, it becomes just as important to be focusing in on that. And so the conversation that we want to get into today is, through this disruption, how have you accomplished better engagement or accomplished successful engagement? And what are your thoughts as you're leading into the American Rescue Plan Act? We have 3 questions that we want to pose to all of you today. The first one is, how are you identifying community needs and priorities that are going to be addressed under the what we call the ARPA program? How does resident input help guide the delivery of public services in your community? What value does that input provide for your decision makers? And then finally, what strategies and tools are you finding successful for engaging residents and tracking performance? And as you think about that, one area that I don't think I have focused enough on, but if there's any suggestions or tips that you can provide of reaching those hard to reach populations, I would love to hear what strategies you're using for getting to those populations and getting the input that you need from those really difficult to reach populations. So with that, what I'd love to do is kick into the first questions. And Kelley, Kinsler, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
As you start thinking about your engagement experience, can you talk about the most successful ways that you've used in identifying community needs and priorities that communities will need to be paying attention to as they start working on this ARPA stuff?
Absolutely. Good morning, and thank you, Matt, for having me. I think that when you're identifying community needs, it's super important to think out of the box and how, from generation to generation, a community is communicating. So you have the older generation, for example. I probably fall into that. We have the older generation that prefers to attend meetings and read things in paper. And then you have a whole new generation coming up that doesn't even touch paper usually. Everything is done through social media. And so I think the most important way to engage a community, and not just a select few, is through various forms of media communication. So obviously you want to use every social media outlet that you can to try to reach a particular group. But you also want to have meetings where, especially now that we're in a place in the United States where we actually can have open meetings, we want to bring our citizens in. One of the ways that I've always been an advocate for bringing citizens in is you feed them. So you have a town hall meeting, you tell them there's free breakfast. It's amazing how many people will show up. And so I love doing, I like being with people. I like talking to people. I think it's really important in a town hall meeting not to have your politicians lead the meeting, not to have your city manager lead the meeting. I think an independent facilitator is a great way to have a town hall meeting. I think it works. I think people feel comfortable with the facilitator, somebody that they don't know, that they're comfortable sharing ideas with. So I'm a big advocate of town hall meetings, lots of advertisement. You can advertise your town hall meetings on all platforms. You can do it through, the message on your utility bill. You can do it through social media. You can do it through newspapers. You can do it through emails or electronic newspapers. There are just so many ways that we can advertise these days. And so I love bringing the community together when possible. And another thing that I'm a big advocate for in these types of forums is making certain that people's voices are heard. So you can engage them through various platforms and various programs where they can vote yes, no, that, you can have little posters where their ideas can be heard. And then what you do is the facilitator grabs all the information from the town hall meeting, does a city report, and the findings are generated to everybody. So they know that their input mattered and they know that the city listened. So I'm worried that I'm hitting my 3 minutes, but that's one way that you do it. The other way that you can do it is just through electronic polls. Get out there. You can grab people's email information from utility bills and send out polls on what they want in their city. The one thing that's really cool about this rescue plan is that it really is very wide stretching. There's a lot of things that we can do with the money, and we report right back to the U.S. Department of Treasury. The reporting requirements are not stringent, they're not difficult, and so it should be easy money to administer. But I definitely want to wrap this up by saying I agree with you, Matt. We want to make certain that our community is involved with the decisions on how City Hall spends that money.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the ARPA program, because as you start to think about how communities go about assessing needs and do the techniques that you're suggesting, making those investments that are going to be really transformational in your community, communities that'll be successful will probably be those that don't think about the pet project that can help you today, but really should be helping you down the road, especially as you kind of think about the investment. And so thank you, Kelley. I really appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Kelley Bacon, can you talk about how you are going about in identifying community needs and priorities in Chula Vista as it relates to the ARPA fund?
Sure. We're as the second largest city in San Diego County and the 15th largest in the state of California, we're spread out of over 52 miles. We have coming up close to 300,000 people. And so it's really important that we're able to communicate with the entire community. We're in some ways a tale of two cities, where we have sort of the east side, much wealthier, and then the west side, where we have, we've recognized that we've had some issues with the digital divide and reaching people who English is not their first language. So we have about 57% of our population is Hispanic. And so since the start of the pandemic, we've implemented a robust information program to inform the residents about public health measures, requirements for mask wearing, different services as far as getting tested, food distribution, and then the ability to get vaccines out. We launched communication efforts starting back in March of 2020, when it was determined that this was a serious public health threat. We established websites, chulavistaca.gov/coronavirus. We implemented social media messaging similar to what Kelly Kinsler was saying, using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just anything we can. And we did everything in English and in Spanish. We distributed press releases with updates on the city's public health directives, county and state directives, resource information. City staff and the electeds provided media interviews again in English and in Spanish. We communicated options for securing services. So we had some ability in some areas to have services in person, and then provided a lot of areas where people virtually could get the same services or go online. Like, many cities, our education, nonprofit organizations, business, healthcare providers, and more, worked with us to make sure that we were providing the information and services that were necessary to the community. And our mayor, city council, and staff have strong connections through the city as we've created a lot of these partnerships. We teamed up with Sharp Healthcare, which is one of the county's leading providers, to launch a vaccine superstation, and which was open 7 days a week. We, collaborated with social service providers and partnered with our county government to staff 211 calls and things like that. As I think it probably was with many cities and counties, we had staff that pivoted almost immediately to start providing services that they're not used to. Our recreation staff were delivering food to the community. Our library staff were responding to 211 calls, providing information on services. And I'm probably doing the same thing, just running on here.
Let me ask you a question. As it relates to kind of your receipt of these ARPA funds and identifying community needs, is there any kind of a specific strategy that the community is using right now for identifying what the shift in community needs are that have evolved since the last couple of years?
Yes. So we are, working on our expenditure plan. We're receiving $57.5 million from the American Rescue Plan. And the needs, as you can imagine, are far greater than that. Both requests from our departments on their recovery efforts, as well as the community, small businesses, and such. So, we're doing, getting a lot of input from the community, both through social media and doing community surveys, trying to find out what the needs are. Based on initial input, though, when I first saw the amount that we were going to get, it sounded like a large dollar amount, and then I very quickly realized it was not large at all compared to what the needs were. So we anticipate that just with the information that we've received so far, that we will be allocating money to small business support, replacing HVAC systems to make our buildings safer. There will be community support to get some of our programs back up and running for classes like through recreation or libraries that support families. We ran a school away from home school so that our city employees could continue. Our firefighters and police could come in, and we ran a school to keep the kids have the ability to do their online teaching. We did that through our rec centers. And then we'll I'm sure be expanding our Wi-Fi, our broadband, so that we can communicate, better with the entire community. So, I think, and those are big ticket items. So
Yeah.
Thank you. Mike, can you talk about how you are going about assessing community needs as you start to enter into this American Rescue Plan stage?
Well, one of the things we always have to be careful with is sometimes you're going to have a very loud minority that will be trying to dictate direction and policy. And so we've got to be conscious with that. Also, what I've noticed over my experience is that you have greater community involvement when they're upset about something. So if you don't have good drainage, they're going to become engaged. If you don't have a good library, they're going to be engaged about that. If you have traffic problems, they're going to be engaged about that. And so from our standpoint, we've had some disasters lately. So they're right now they're focusing on drainage, and they're focusing on brush collection and things like that. And trying to get public engagement has been a real, push on our part. We're a small community, about 50,000, and social media now is a lot easier for everyone because they can now use a cell phone. Before, you need to have a laptop or desktop to be able to engage, but now you can do it on your cell phone. So we have a large portion of our community that's very engaged, and our population is probably about 93% Hispanic, and then the rest is others. And so we do some in Spanish. And so it got, during the pandemic, a lot of people were spending time at home. So they had a lot of time to be engaged with us about everything. And it got to the point where we had to hire a PR person that mainly was doing social media, answering questions, sending out information. And so we're doing the same thing and trying to get input about what the needs are, and just pretty much open discussion. And if you look at your social media page, every day, which our person is doing all the time, and is feeding it back to the mayor, the commission, and ourselves. And they look at it. I mean, last night I was talking to elected officials, talking about comments. And since we've had rain, we staff based upon what the average needs and the service levels need for 12 months out of the year. Not when you have a ton of rain coming in and grass is growing, 12 inches every 5 days. And so we mowed the park on Tuesday, and they were complaining last night that the grass was high. So we sent out a parks director out there to look at it. Well, it grew 1.5 inches between the time they cut it and now, and they were going to play softball on it, and they were complaining about it. So we have to be conscious about what those needs are, and we listen to it. But our main primary focus has been on social media. We are updating our city master plan. So we've been having neighborhood meetings in the community, and with the lifting of the restrictions, that has really helped. And so we have one tonight in a neighborhood, and we're going to have a series of those. And part of that is listening to what they want and what they need, and how can we take what we can spend the money from the American Rescue Plan, where can we spend it, and how can we get there quicker than we had anticipated? Because basically it's a windfall for us. We're going to get about 9.2 million. That's not a whole lot of money for some people, but for a small city like Weslaco, that's a lot of money. So we're going to be looking at what they're saying and what they're telling us, but we're mainly using social media to kind of catch that information. The library has also done some outreach about what we need to do. And of course, if you're doing it at the library, they're all saying we need a new library and we need an expanded library. So everybody has their own, special interests that they want to be pushing. And so the matter is how do we balance out all their needs even with a 9.2, which is a lot of money. It's not enough to take care of all their needs. So at the end of the day, the commission is going to have to take a look at it later this summer and prioritize what they're going to try to do this year and what they're going to try to do next year. With hopefully we get the second part of it, because if Congress doesn't take it away and use it, for their infrastructure package, then I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the other responsibilities that local governments generally have is, I know like for larger communities like Chula Vista, you need to demonstrate the effectiveness of the use of the funds. And so you need to have a system in place to help kind of track it. Local government, I think at the end of the ARPA cycle in 3 years, will hopefully be able to reflect back and say, here's how effectively these dollars moved our communities forward collectively. And it's kind of unique, and you have the advantage of kind of being in your master planning process where you're engaging with people right now around needs. And so timing is good actually for getting kind of ARPA ideas, right? I mean,
that's right. Sometimes in this business, being lucky is very good.
Yeah. But I think the other point, Mike, that just to kind of add and give me your thoughts, it's, that people are going to be engaged when they're passionate about a topic. Communities that are successful with engagement will build that engagement when it's quiet, so that so people have a context around your operations. And so when you do get into that storm, whatever that storm is, they'll have the ability to put it in a context, so they maybe will react on a little bit different level. If you try to initiate engagement when you're in the middle of a crisis, it won't be nearly as successful as if you kind of think ahead and do it during the quiet period. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's one of the things that you have to use your advisory boards. And in Weslaco, we have a ton of advisory boards for almost everything you can think of. And so they're citizens, and we have single member districts in our community. So there's an advisory board member from every district. So, and I assign a department head to every one. So the idea is to keep them engaged, keep them informed, because they have their own circle of friends. And the idea is to keep them informed and to inform people. The same thing goes with social media. And what you're saying is exactly, it's right on point, because we are engaged with people on social media all the time. And so if you're hearing from not just sorry to say this, the complainers, and you got the people who are not the complainers, that they are actually want to be engaged in the community and make the community better, other than they want to be the squeaky wheel, then they in turn sometimes jump into that social media discussion. Just like when they were, the example I used on the park, we had probably about 80 people that were commenting on it, but because now we have someone who's actually engaged and discussing with the public and telling them what we're doing, and she had actually pictures because she happened to be out there, she posted it. We had probably about close to 60% that were jumping on and saying, no, the city is trying to do their job, and yes, they were mowing it, and yes. And so what you're saying is exactly right. We got to make sure that we stay engaged with not just the people who are single issue focused, but are also concerned about the entire community, and they are informed and they are engaged. And so, but that is harder, because everybody has a job, everybody has a family, everybody has a life, and for them to say, I'm going to get on the social media and see what's going on in the city of Weslaco, that might be the last thing when they have toddlers or elementary school kids that they're working with.
Yeah. Thank you. Great perspective. Let's move on to the second question. And Kelley Bacon, I'd like to start with you. Kelley, can you talk about how community input influences how resident and business needs are met in Chula Vista?
Can you repeat the question?
I'm trying to, how does community input influence how successfully you're able to meet resident and business needs? What role does it play?
It's really important. You hear a lot about in our city about connected communities and the different ways that we're reaching out, and we're always trying to find out what it is that the different areas of our community need, and our council takes that very seriously into consideration. And we're as we're starting to come back and have in-person meetings, we're still also doing e-commenting, and we get a lot of information from the community on whatever the various issue of the week or night it happens to be. And we have a good communications team here at the city, and they track all of that information and then provide that back to our city manager and departments and our city council, and then share that back with the community as well, so that everybody knows what the issues at the time are.
Does the Chula Vista do an annual strategic planning process? And if so, what role does the public play in that?
We update our strategic plan, and we do seek input from the community as we do that. And we go out and we do stakeholder meetings and in the community, and we seek input on what those are. But it's largely driven by our council, but we do seek input from the community to make sure that we're meeting the needs.
Okay, great, thank you. Mike, how does community input influence how you're able to meet resident and business needs?
Very important. Like I said before, we have a limited amount of resources. So where do we put our emphasis on? When I got here 7 years ago, the emphasis was on, paving streets and working on parks. After a few floods, the priority changed from public input, where you have, we had public forums that we had hundreds of people that attended those forums, and the focus is on drainage. And even with the floods we've had lately, the community now is saying from our social media contacts and the process we're going through our master plan and hearing from people is, yes, drainage is important, but let's not forget about parks. We've been focusing for the last 3 or 4 years on drainage, and let's start looking at expanding our parks and putting in trails and what do we do. So it plays a very, very vital role and to the mayor and city council and to me as the city manager and our department heads to make sure that we're addressing the needs of the community and to listen to them. I've been doing this a long time like you have. In the old days, it was the city manager and the mayor and the commission, and we decided what was important for the community. We're going to tell you what you need. Well, that doesn't work anymore. And if you try to do that, you're not going to be employed very long. And so listening now is extremely important. And, before we were the experts in everything because we went to school and we learned you can put any topic on the agenda, and by the next day, everybody is an expert in that field because they can get on the internet and research it. So our real talent now is pulling people together and listening and sorting it out and helping the elected officials with the public input establish those priorities.
Yeah, I like the fact that you bring up this notion of balancing needs, because you're right. You're hearing from a certain population, but if you're not paying attention to the balance of the wisdom that you're getting from your community, you're not going to be as informed as you need to be. So I appreciate that, and I totally resonate with the way that our jobs and our profession and the way local government has evolved over the course of time. That listening factor becomes such an important aspect of it. So thank you for that. Kelley Kinsler, can you talk about how community input has influenced how resident and business needs have been met in your experience?
Absolutely. So first of all, community input in decisions is always important. But I completely agree with Mike in that there are, I'll just tell you what city managers typically call them. They're the cave people, the citizens against virtually everything. You have that one group of people, and if you're not careful as a policymaker, you will find yourself listening to the squeaky wheel, as Mike calls it, the very loud voices, the vocal minority. And so you have to really make certain that you're balancing that. Just because they're the loudest does not mean that their input should influence all of your decisions. And so I also appreciated the other Kelley's comments about they're recognizing the way that Chula Vista is divided, and that reaching out to each side of Chula Vista requires different strategies, basically is what Kelley said. So the other two city managers have given excellent input, and I don't want to repeat what they've said, but I do want to, make certain that we really emphasize the fact that as a policymaker, I think the ones who listen to not only the vocal minority are usually the most successful. There's never a decision where community input is not important. However, with that said, community input may be so extreme that the budget cannot handle what the community wants to do. And so at that point, it's your job as a policymaker to figure out the priorities and to make certain that you're spending taxpayer dollars responsibly.
Kelley, have you found any successful way? I'm so glad you brought that up, because people that are not connected to local government, they see a problem, they identify a problem, they want to fix tomorrow. And
absolutely.
That's just not the way it's possible to work. And so this whole issue about managing expectations, do you have any successful ideas or tips that you can share on how you can best manage resident expectations?
One thing that I've had a picture on my wall, and I still believe it to this day. And it says, "Let the sun shine." And so that's one way that you manage resident expectations. You always be truthful. And you make certain that they understand, with many things. Streets are a great example. Some type of flood system, a bridge. You want to make sure that your residents understand the timelines. And I always prefer to give them worst case scenario, because I like to come back and say, hey, it happened. You have your rain days involved in your contracts. You have, various other factors that come in. And so when you say, this bridge project will be completed, late summer of this year, What's the worst, let's give them the very latest date out that you can and let them know you're doing that. Obviously, be transparent, but it's always fun to come back and say, we told you that we thought the latest would be August. We're happy to report that it actually was completed in late spring. I would rather do that than tell somebody we're hoping for it to be completed in late spring. Oops, didn't get completed until late summer. So I like that strategy regarding expectation. Give them the worst possible scenario on when something could be complete, and then hopefully the best case scenario pans out.
Beat those expectations. Great strategy.
Absolutely. But also, like I said, I'm a big believer in letting the sun shine. These are government funds. We should be transparent. We are public employees or public elected officials, and the residents and the taxpayers are counting on us to expend funds in a responsible manner.
Yeah.
And to be transparent.
Yep, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you so much. Mike, I'm going to move on to the third question and start with you. Can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful for two things: engaging residents in getting their input, but then, and just as importantly, how are you going about tracking your performance as a community?
Okay. I mean, the first one, I've already kind of talked about it, and I think we all have. I mean, for us, the big one right now is social media. We do use print media. We do televise our meetings, and we have a public comment that either department heads or somebody else will come in and explain what we're doing. On major projects, we actually keep it on our social media site and our website. So we track things on any major project. So let's take example, some of the money we get in, and we're going to be using it because part of it is for water and sewer, and we have a particular area that we constantly have a large sewer line that keeps failing, and we're probably gonna have to replace it. And I keep telling my staff and the elected officials, do you prefer to have a little water in your house, a couple inches of water, or do you want to have sewer in your house? And they'll always say, I'll take the flow of water, not the sewer. And so what we've done is that we put on our webpage, and we put it on social media, and we put a timeline and where we're at. We are playing around with a program with an engineer where you can actually click on it. It's interactive. It'll tell you, where they at on bidding that particular project, where they are from the standpoint of construction of that project, where's the contractor on it? Is it 60%, 80%? And there's multiple projects. So the idea is to put it out there. One, it saves a lot of time because we have a lot of people who just want to know, and they're much more engaged now than I've ever seen them in the past. And I think particularly during the pandemic, because they were home, so they had time to sit on their phone or their laptop or whatever, and let me see what's going on and let me give them my input. So the more information that I can give them that's readily available, that they don't have to call City Hall and or call the mayor and the commission. And one of my philosophies is, well, of course, keep them out of trouble, keep our elected officials out of trouble, because sometimes when they come from the private side, what you can do in the private side and what you can do in the public side, you're very successful. Public side, you go to jail. So that's one. But the other one is make them look good. And so if we keep that information on our website and on our social media, and so when they get those calls and where are you on it, we don't know, where they can say, go to our webpage. It's on there. We've had it on there for the last year. You can track it. It gives them a real easy out, and the citizens kind of like it, and they kind of back off, and it keeps them informed, and they should be informed. If it's affecting them and their neighborhood and their community, they ought to be informed. The fact if they want to go on there or not, that's up to them. But I think our role as a city manager and public administrators is to put it out there, and it's there when they want to see it, If it's at midnight or if it's at 12 noon, they don't have to wait for 8 o'clock for City Hall to open up so they can call the city manager.
Mike, do you have any metrics in place for kind of tracking your performance year to year?
Not really. In McAllen, we did. We participated with ICMA's performance standards, and those were on the budget, and those were tracked. The issue gets to be when you're a small community, you can spend a lot of time coming up with a matrix and tracking it, and you just don't have the hours in the day to get things done. So we do it on major projects that we do that, but on the smaller things, I don't have the staff to do that.
Yeah,
It would be great. Weslaco tried doing that about 8 or 9 years ago, and they hired someone to do that. But during hard time, that position was lost.
got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Kelley Kinsler, what strategies and tools have you found successful for engaging residents and tracking your performance?
So there's not been a community that I've led or an agency that I've led where performance has not been tracked. And so it's very easy to track performance. Performance measures, measurable objectives can literally be your path forward so that everybody stays on the same page. Measurable objectives are not hard to write. They should be communicated after you've received citizen input on an annual basis. And then every year I like to report out to the citizens where we are on the measurable objectives. I think it shows the citizens that this is what they wanted. This is, how the direction they wanted the city to go. And that's the way the staff and the policymakers took it. But measurable objectives, you need those pretty much for any grant that you do. And so I just apply, I guess probably because I started my career with Department of Justice as a grant administrator, it's really easy for me to apply measurable objectives to county administration, city administration, or state administration. But, some people, some agencies get, and I think Mike talked about it earlier, but Kelley, one of them talked about the strategic plan. I think it was Kelley, actually. And so what I have experienced is some cities get that strategic plan and they pay a lot of money for it. They pay attention to it for a little bit and then it sits on a shelf, right? And so I'm absolutely against that. If you're going to use public money to pay for something like that, you want to make sure that that's your Bible and you're following it and that you're updating it. As Mike mentioned, the needs may change as they did in Weslaco. All of a sudden you have a real issue with flooding. But whether you're doing it off a strategic plan or annually, or both, you should always have measurable objectives and you should always be paying attention to them. A, do they need to change? And B, are we meeting these objectives? Do we need to restate the objectives? Are we being too aggressive with the objectives? Do we need to scale them back a little bit? But I love working with objectives because then you can show tangible results and you can show the activities that were necessary and that you did in order to achieve the objectives.
Kelley, in your experience, as you have done those performance metrics, have you done both kind of what I'll call quantitative versus and the qualitative? And is there any kind of relative value that you put with either of those?
So I've done both. Quantitative, so much easier. Did you pave 50 miles of street? The objective is to pave 50 miles of street. The answer, the measurable activity after that is, were 50 miles of streets paved. And so quantitative is always so much easier. Qualitative can be more subjective, as we all know. And so it's a little bit harder to measure. And it's just not as easy sometimes to sell, but absolutely you should do both. But I definitely prefer quantitative.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kelley Bacon, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you have found successful for engaging your residents and for tracking performance?
Yeah, so we compile, for example, our social media and news media metrics every month. And we've seen a tremendous increase, particularly during COVID, in the number of people engaged on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and such. So, for an example, in 2020, we had more than 24 million impressions across TV, web, and social media. We received extensive media coverage with 575 media stories appearing in print, web, and broadcast. We engaged with followers more than 375,000 times. We received more than 1.4 million visits to the website. So we actually track all of that information every month and report that out. In addition, most of our departments, or many of them, have dashboards, and they track whatever the issues are. And so the community can log on and look at that dashboard and see, okay, what things are happening, what are we focused on, and what are they doing to mitigate whatever the concern is.
Have you kind of what I was talking to Kelley Kinsler about, the notion of the quantitative versus the qualitative on your metrics? Do you incorporate the qualitative side?
Not so much. And I think it's for the same reason Kelley mentioned. It's really easy to put the quantitative information together and to track that. The qualitative is really, you hear about it. It's the input you get from the community, and often the squeaky wheel in the community. But, those are tougher to track. But we do try to engage with the community to find out what what's working, what their needs are. But you don't get as many people that, I don't know that you always get a true picture of especially a city our size and as diverse as it is, to see what everyone's needs are. So I would agree with Kelley that the quantitative is much easier to track.
Yeah, given the scale, I mean, the numbers that you just shared on your impressions, that's pretty impressive. I mean, that really does kind of point to how engaged your residents are on wanting to look for information. We do know from our research that during the pandemic, trust in local government actually increased. And I think it's just because local governments around the country demonstrated and how they can be responsive to the pandemic needs or the needs of the residents. And so that level of trust actually went up, as did overall engagement levels, because people were searching for the truth. But we also know that it's a very fragile trust, that if you don't continue to engage with people, you can just as easily lose that engagement, and it can fall off. And so engagement ends up to be kind of an organizational value as opposed to a project. But being able to track it, like you're suggesting, is such an important thing. Does your strategic plan or your metrics, does that stay live, and do you report that out to the community?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kelley Bacon. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We do. I have to say, in the past, it was probably done more often. This last year has been such a focus on COVID and not as much on what our strategic plan was, because as you're dealing with this an emergency, and so you kind of set it aside a little bit while you're working on what the issue at hand has been for all of us.
Yeah, cities have had they've had a few things on their plate, haven't they? For sure. Oh, thank you. I would love to just open it up for a couple minutes to see if there's any questions or issues that any of you want to ask each other, or points that you want to bring up that maybe you forgot about. Anybody have anything?
Yeah, man. One of the things that you're talking about metrics, and when you're asking the question, I'm thinking of what ICMA does, and I don't know how familiar we are with that process, but it tracks. I mean, you got to track how many inspections an inspector does, and what's the performance on that, how many weedy lots you mow, and how long does it take, and very detailed. But as it relates to the American Rescue Plan, even in small cities, you can go ahead and have metrics, and it's on those what I call major issues. If you're going to pave roads, and that's important to the community, as Kelley was talking about, well, then you pave. For us, it's going to be like 5 or 6 miles, and that's what we put in our metrics. It's 5 or 6 miles, and that we're going to build a park, or that we're going to build a splash pad, or we're going to add on to the library, or we're going to, add 2 million gallon capacity to the water plant. Those things that are major issues to the community, and I think that's what we're going to be looking at. And those have always been put in our budget, and then we actually review them again during our audit, and again on the following year budget, that we say that did we get it done or not. And we try to stick to around 15 to 20 that are important to the community based on the community engagement we have. And then we follow that up with our annual state of the city that's given. And I've been doing this for, 25 years, where the mayor actually states, this is what we said we'd do last year, and here's what we've done. And we followed up with pictures or whatever. And at one time we had most of our ambulances were down. And so, we said we were going to buy new ambulances. And so we showed the ambulances that we bought. and we showed pictures of what we paved and what we did. But when you start looking at the quality of it, that's much harder to do. But like in our paving, we were just paving, and now we bought a piece of equipment that takes the edges out. So when it gets to the curb, it smooths out to the edge and meets the curb. You don't have this 1.5 inch gap between the curb with the valley gutter and the pavement. And so now it's nice and smooth, and it's amazing. You know, we had a lot of people who ride bikes and walk, and they were tripping, and they noticed we changed it, and they love it. They said, "We love how you're paving now. You should have been doing this years." So it is a very important issue in measuring the quality, but that gets to be very, very hard. And sometimes it gets down to the people that you have, and that's another element: how successful we are, the people we hire, and how well we fire them too. Probably firing is more important because they get that in trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think also, Matt, regarding quantitative data, absolutely quantitative data is important for the big items, as Mike discussed. But quantitative data, you can take that down as little as you want or small as you want. You know, the next level might be that you want to increase your library reading programs from X number to X number. You want to increase your right-of-way mowings per year from X number to X number. You want to increase the meals served to seniors from X number to X number, whatever. You want to spray for mosquitoes, you know, once every 2 weeks versus once a month, whatever. You can just keep dissecting that and bringing the quantitative data and making it smaller and smaller. But yes, certainly the easiest things to measure are those big things.
Yeah,
But-
of course, the challenge is having the resources and the staff time necessary to collect that data, which is
Absolutely, that's right.
a good point that Mike brought up.
But it's not hard to collect it if you have a system in place.
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't mention was over the last few years, we've been able to get 2 half-cent sales tax measures passed. And so with each of those, one was for infrastructure and the other one was for public safety. And we have citizen oversight committees that meet monthly and to make sure that we followed the plan that we said we would follow. And they really track. If you say you're going to pave this much streets, that's what gets done. Or if you're going to, you know, increase your response times by adding more officers, that we in fact are doing that. So we have a pretty engaged community that watch very closely to make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do.
Kelley, has a citizen advisory group worked pretty successfully?
It does. You know, it's a very diverse group. We worked hard to make sure that we have people on those committees that represent all parts of our city, and they're all very engaged.
Yeah,
and really very helpful in making sure we stay on track.
And one of the other things, and it was mentioned by both Kelleys, and that is if you go ahead and you want to increase mosquito spraying from once a month to once a week, then that makes it really easy when you put the performance standards, saying that's why I need to hire 2 more guys or 2 more people to drive, not just guys, could be women, to drive the sprayer. And so it's measured. So when you say I need to have another, you know, $250,000 this year because we have a mosquito problem, and then you have the measurements to show that you did exactly what you said you did. And I have found that to be very helpful when you're doing measurements and you're promising, you know, the public a certain thing. I've done it once where the police chief was, you know, crime's a little high with stealing cars. If you gave me 3 more guys, that I can set up a special task force and I will reduce car thefts by 50%. And then next year, we show it to them. Yes, you gave us that. And no, we reduced it by 60%. Then that also builds trust with not just the elected officials, but with the public. And you demonstrate that. And that's where I think the measurements come into play, and they're very important. And I think it's going to be more so with the American Rescue Act and how we do that. And do we meet the things that we're going to tell the public we're going to do and the elected officials?
Right. Thank you for that. And that kind of leads me into kind of closing this meeting out. All of you are working on identifying the needs for your communities around the ARPA program. And it's very clear that y'all have a good appreciation for what you're trying to accomplish, and that you need to involve the public in that process. And so that came ringing through really clearly. And Mike, of course, you've got the advantage of already having a project in front of you to help you in that kind of alignment process for identifying those community needs. So best of lucks with that. All of you have talked about the various ways that you've engaged with the public. I think I really, Kelley, Kinsler, I love the let the sun shine. Part of that engagement process is being authentic, being truthful, getting the information out. Because I think people will help build trust in local government if they feel like they're being informed and are part of that decision-making process. And it doesn't matter if you're in a small community or a larger community, that accountability aspect, I think, is a universal rule just in any kind of community environment. And all of you have used various engagement practices and implementation metrics as you have gone about tracking your performance and building in that engagement piece. And it was a good conversation between the quantitative and qualitative. I'm a strong believer that you need to have an understanding of where people's priorities are, because as you start to think about aligning your resources, you want to make it sure that it's consistent where people's priorities are. And that probably would err more on the qualitative side, but the quantitative side is such a critical part of it as well, that there's a blend between those two. So it was a great conversation and great perspectives. I really appreciate all of you sharing your ideas and your approaches. So let me just kind of wrap this up. Thank you for your participation. It means a lot for you to pull some time out of your schedule to help share ideas and assist others in learning what can work and what ideas they might want to consider. I do these conversations every week, and so I would love it if there was somebody that you know that you think would be good or have an interest in participating, get them connected with me somehow, and we'll try to get them scheduled so that they can share their perspectives as well. Within about a week, you'll start seeing highlight segments on LinkedIn so that you will be able to see your short segments of your conversation and your responses to each of the individual questions. And I'll send them to you as well so that you definitely will have access to them. We just ask you that you share them throughout your LinkedIn so that people that respect your opinions can benefit from your perspectives. And I'll reach out and connect with each of you just so I can get some feedback on this panel today, and what any ideas that you have that I can use to make sure they continue to improve this process. I would really appreciate it. Always trying to do a better job and to meet the needs of getting these ideas out. So thank you very much for your time. I wish you well with all of the work that you're doing and through the ARPA process, and we'll really look forward. The nice thing about these panels is I get to meet 3 great people every week, and today was no exception. So I really appreciate your interest and your willingness to be part of it. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.